Walter Brueggemann, some of you are familiar with him. We've studied some of his writings and listened to some of his speeches. Walter Brueggemann, who is a wonderful Hebrew scholar, has suggested that one helpful approach to preaching and teaching the Psalms is to ask the question, what would the anti-psalm be? What would the opposite of this psalm look like? So what's the opposite of Psalm 25? Well, it might go something like this. I am absolutely on my own in this mess. I have to somehow dig myself out of this trouble, and since I can't count on anyone else for help, there's no point in paying any attention, even to God. God doesn't care anyway. That's the anti-psalm. That's not what I'm preaching. Unfortunately, however, that's exactly how many people approach the most difficult challenges in their lives. I'm on my own here. There's no one around that can do this for me. Now there's some truth to the fact that we ought to do everything we can to help ourselves. I remember when I was in high school, there was a saying, reach up as far as you can, and God will reach down the rest of the way. And there are plenty of situations where there's absolutely nothing we can do to help someone else until they're willing to help themselves. If you have family members struggling with addictions, we love them, and I think probably addictions are the best example, because you can't help them until they're willing to help themselves. But on the other hand, there are a lot of situations where a little help goes a long way. Just to know that you are not alone, that there are folks who are pulling for you, who care about you, who want the best for you. Tamlin and I spent the last 3 days down in Seattle with her mom, who had surgery late last night for ovarian cancer. Yet every step of the way, Tam was sending text messages to a large group of people who were responding, saying, we're with you, we care about you, tell her we love her, we're surrounding her with our prayers. That made a heck of a lot of difference. The psalmist here in Psalm 25 is turning to God for help, and basically saying, there's no one else who can help me like you can, God. And it all starts with an attitude of worship. To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. And then the psalmist asks for God to lead them in the right paths, the ways of God. One of the concepts that jumped out at me in this psalm was a simple principle. There has to be a balance between wanting God to walk with us on our journey and being willing to walk with God and follow God's ways. It's not a one-way street. Just because we believe doesn't mean that God somehow turns into the heavenly bodyguard, always protecting us and making our lives instantly superior and easier than all others. We have to balance the desire to have God with us with a willingness to conform ourselves to the way of God. I think the psalmist is trying to achieve just such a balance. God, deliver me from shame, and don't let my enemies exult over me. And then in the next breath, they ask for God to help them to know God's ways. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth. If we want God to be close to us, we need to get closer to God. Once again, and some of you have heard this before, I'm reminded of one of the favorite sayings of one of my mentors from seminary days. He often said, feel far from God? Guess who moved? If we want God to be close, we need to move closer to God. Now, as you are well aware by now, this is the first Sunday of Advent, and you might ask, why preach on a psalm? Advent is a time of waiting and preparing. And I think that this psalm is trying to teach us how to both wait and walk with God. Advent is all about waiting. We wait with such a deep expectation for the presence of God that will surprise us in new and in deep ways. But we don't wait like a group of people waiting for the bus to show up. There's very little, I don't know if you've ever done this, there's very little you can do to make the bus arrive any faster than it's going to arrive. But you know those people get out in the middle of the street kind of looking as if that's going to help? But that's not so when we're waiting for God. Because there's a whole lot we can do to hasten the presence of God. And this psalm tells us the way. Now, if you're like me, you do not like waiting. But I'm at the stage in my life, it took many, many years, where I'm finally realizing there's nothing I can do to speed things along. I've found often my efforts do nothing but make things worse. I am an anxious person, and I don't like to have things not go. My wife is smiling, such a big smile back there. Stop it. I don't like to have things not go according to schedule. But my worrying about it doesn't change it. During the season of Advent, we're reminded of the concept of productive waiting. Yes, we are still waiting, but we are not just spinning our wheels. We use this time as a wonderful season of introspection, looking into ourselves, looking into our lives, into our ways, and asking God to help direct us onto right paths. Well, what does that look like in 21st century in our culture today? Challenging time to live. What does it mean to walk in the ways of God in the United States of America in 2018? Well, first of all, personally, I think we need to wipe our slates clean. The psalmist asks God to forget the sins of their youth and their transgressions. Think about it. There are so many people walking around today who are absolutely dragging around a heavy load of guilt from things that happened years ago. It's really difficult to walk in the ways of God when we think we're not even worthy of having God's attention. The psalmist simply asks God to forget about all that stuff. Forget about it. I'm sure you know that's one of God's specialties. God is more than willing to forget about all the stupid stuff, the selfish choices that we've made that have hurt others and ourselves. God is nothing if not a loving and forgiving God. So the first step is to wipe our slate clean. Leave that guilt behind. You have to believe that God has the compassion to wipe our slates clean. Because until we get past that, it's really difficult to learn from God. So allow yourself to be forgiven, and then we can learn about the ways of God. And those ways are not difficult. Those ways are not hard to understand. Those ways are not some far-out mystical formula that is nearly impossible to achieve. According to the psalmist, God's ways are steadfast love and faithfulness. To love and be faithful. To love may require the most work of all. It requires that we consider ourselves to be worthy of love. Now that may sound easy, but it's not. We can come up with 1,000 reasons that we're not worthy of love. To realize, however, and to accept that we are worthy of love is very elusive. I have found, I think, that most of humanity's problems come from the fact that there are a whole lot of people out there who don't feel worthy of love. And I'm guessing, I have difficulty with this. I'm guessing that probably 90% of the people have difficulty in this area. And if you don't feel that you are worthy of love, then it's really hard to love others. If you can't love yourself, if you can't allow yourself to be loved, then it's difficult to recognize the worth of others and realize that they need to know love and acceptance just as much as you do. To love and to be faithful. Faithfulness comes as we begin to walk in the ways of God. There are going to be all sorts of things thrown at us and put in front of us that can knock us off God's path. I'm a little odd in the things that I enjoy on television, but one of the things that I used to enjoy was this Japanese game show where people had to run this really difficult obstacle course, which was by itself difficult enough, but it was made even more difficult because there were people using air cannons to blast these huge rubber balls at the contestants the whole time, trying to knock them off course. When you are attempting to walk the path of God, the same thing's going to happen. Not air cannons. And some of those things come from outside, and some of the most difficult come from inside. You are going to be going against the grain of our culture. But I will say this, I think our culture needs some course correction. Every year I am amazed at some of the images that are shown on television on Black Friday as people push and shove and struggle to be the one that gets in there first to get the best bargain in the store. When did it become normal to push and shove your way to the best deals? That's not walking in the way of God. That's not loving your neighbor as you love yourself. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. In order to love and be faithful, we have to adjust our approach to issues of global conflict, refugees, gun violence, equality, and a sustainable distribution of the earth's resources so that all might have enough and equal rights. We have to put the attitude of me first, whether it's Best Buy trying to get a television or just in life in general. We have to put that concept behind us and consider what's best for all involved. The psalmist reminds us that in order to have God walking beside us, we must walk the way that God is walking. That makes sense, huh? We have to head in the direction that God is going. And God is walking the way of love and justice. God is headed in the direction of a world where all are cherished. So what does this psalm teach us? Number one, forgive yourself because God has already forgiven you. Allow yourself to be loved because you are a precious child of God. And then live the way of forgiveness and love. And soon you will feel the hand of God as you walk together with God. While we're waiting during this Advent season, let's start walking in God's direction. Amen.
This has been adapted from a selection by Steve Goodyear. What if today you gave yourself permission to be outrageously kind and generous? What if you extended as much goodwill and kindness as you possibly can muster to every person you meet? What if you decided to put a little extra in the offering plate? And what if you did it with no thought of reward? I'm sure of one thing. It would be a day you would never regret. Will the deacons please collect this offering this morning?